Lamed Amud Beis 30b. Towards the bottom of the page. So if you count up from the end of the middle sized, like the middle bar, and you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines up from the middle sized bar. Look, the middle bar. Count 5 lines up, not from the bottom of the page, but from on top of the wide. Yeah, count 5 up from there. Yeah,
okay.
And there you'll see it.
Sorry, what were you looking for?
Yeah. So what we're looking for is, you have it. The word's Ella. It's the third word. Nami lema Ella. The line starts with the word Nami.
Yeah,
and
I
lema.
see it. Okay.
So I thought you were asking about this, because what we're looking for is, we're still scouring through the Gemara to find a statement by Rabbi Shimon Shizuri.
Yeah, right.
So that's why I thought that's what you're asking. Right? The Gemara told us a statement that we have that was unqualified. We were taught to commit to memory that the halacha follows Rabbi Shimon Shizuri. And not only that, but anytime Rabbi Shimon Shizuri is mentioned, the halacha follows him. So the original statement, the first half of the statement, which said the halacha follows Shimon Shizuri, is talking about a specific case. And then it adds, and wherever else you see his name. But the original statement, which says that the halacha follows Shimon Shizuri, needs to apply to somewhere, what you're talking about. So we've gone through a few different scenarios, and we've been introduced to various different interesting halachas, sometimes anomalies and sometimes interesting stuff. And we're trying to apply this statement to those teachings. And the end is that so far, every statement that we've had from Rabbi Shimon Shizuri, someone has already told us that the halacha follows Rabbi Shimon Shizuri, therefore rendering it superfluous for us to memorize that Chanina said that the halacha follows Shimon Shizuri. We already know that. And if Chanina is teaching us this, it's because we didn't know it yet. So you have to find some other case that Rabbi Shimon Shizuri speaks of, and no one else has said anything about it, and then we can apply it, then we can assume Rabbi Chanina was talking about that. So now we're introduced to another set of laws. And today we're introduced to the halachas of Meiser, Truma. But a specific part of it. We talked about last week, Truma Meiser that gets mixed up, right? Produce that's in doubt, which gets mixed up with produce about which we're not sure if the person I bought it from, the vendor, took his proper tithing. We're going to get back to that soon. But for now, a more basic law in the laws of Meiser. And that is like this. 2 laws primarily that we need to know for this halacha. The first is that tithing goes on a calendar. There's a calendar for tithing.
Because you have to know the cycle of the year.
That's right. You can't just tithe whenever you want.
To know which year it belongs.
You have to know which year it belongs to. So every year has to have its 10%. That's what we say when we say that the 15th of Shvat, Tu B'Shvat, is Rosh Hashanah for the trees. This is what we mean. That the tree's new tithe begins at that date. But what has to happen at that date? And that's the second halacha. Well, it depends. If what you are making, what you are planting, you're planting it because you want its seeds. But what's the purpose for my planting this item? So certain items, for example, trees. It's clear that I'm planting the trees for the sake of the fruit that it's going to produce. Right? So the way I'm going to determine whether something is in the new year or the old year is whether they're not a bear fruit yet. Any fruit that is born before this year belongs to last year, and any fruit after that date belongs to the next year. It's because it's clear. But then there are certain things that it's possible I'm planting them because I want them as seeds, or because I want them as actual full-blown trees or produce. So the example here is, I guess it'll be clear when I talk about the example. There's an item called Pul HaMitzri. Cheese doesn't really help because I don't know what it is. Pul HaMitzri is Egyptian spice of some sort.
Bean.
What is it?
Or a bean, yeah. It's called Pul HaMitzri. It's an Egyptian kind of legume. And Steinfeld says it's cowpea. Anybody know what that is?
Never heard of it.
Rashi says in French it's called Pazula.
What is it?
Pazula. I'm pronouncing it wrong. How do you pronounce that in French, in Old French? At any rate, it's the kind of thing which either I can be planting it because I want the seeds to make, let's say, a spice out of it, or I can be planting it because I want the vegetable that it produces. Now, the seeds that this item produces happens much earlier than the vegetable it produces. Let's say the seed takes a month to produce. I don't know how long these things take, but let's just say, for argument's sake, that from when I plant it, it takes a month till it starts producing seeds, or the way the Gemara puts it here, till it starts producing roots, which is from what the seeds are taken, or it takes, let's say, 5 months until it produces the vegetable, the actual legumes later. So if I planted it to begin with for the vegetable, right, then the cutoff time for what belongs to what year will be determined based on when it starts to produce vegetables. If it produces vegetables before the deadline, before Rosh Hashanah, then it belongs to last year's produce and last year's tithe. If it produces the vegetables after, then it belongs to next year's tithe. But if I'm planting it for the sake of its seeds, not for the sake of its vegetables, then as soon as it starts to take root, it's already considered in production, and therefore belongs to last year's or next year's if it produced those roots after that date. So depending on what my intention is, when I originally plant the produce, it changes what's the determining factor that's going to decide if it belongs to last year's produce and therefore last year's tithe, or next year's produce and next year's tithe.
It depends on the intent, or when it actually...
Depends on the intent.
When it bears its...
Okay, so it depends on when it bears its produce. But what defines its produce? Well, it depends what I want it for. If I want it for its seeds, then it's defined by as soon as it starts getting root. If I want it for its vegetable, then it takes a little longer to produce its vegetables.
When it's actually harvested, when it's actually picked.
Well, even later, sorry, yeah. If it's vegetable, then it goes even later. Not just when it bears vegetable, but actually when I actually pick the vegetables. Yes, my apologies. That's correct.
Much later.
So it's even later, not just when it starts to bear fruit, but when I actually start collecting the fruit or the vegetable.
What you do with it when you, right? If you have, if you want the seeds, and what do? You ignore the fruit.
You would harvest it before you even get to the fruit. If you wanted it for seeds, then you would harvest it before you even get to fruit.
Yeah.
Right, so it wouldn't even make it there. But the point is, it's...
Oh, so you damage the other...
I didn't damage it. I'm using it.
When you take the seeds, does that destroy the...
I assume so.
Yeah.
Because you're not allowing it to fully bud into vegetables, I assume.
Okay.
Right? So...
Okay, I sort of lost this idea.
Yeah, so because... It's not like the capers where... The capers was that kind of... We learned about capers in brachas, where it produces one thing seeds and another thing vegetable. It's a little different. Right. But this is most vegetables. It's one thing that keeps on producing and changes as it grows. Okay. So depending on what I want it for, that's what determines. Okay. So now let's see what happens. Bearing this halachas in mind. So Ella, rather aha, when Chanina said that the halacha follows Reb Shimon Shizuri, perhaps it's talking about the following case. Rabbi Yossi ben Kippur Omer. Rabbi Yossi, son of Kippur, said, Mishum Rabbi Shimon Shizuri, the name of Shimon Shizuri. Pul ha-mitzri, this, let's just say it's a cowpea, that's what Steinsaltz says it is. I don't know what it is, maybe in the book he has a picture. This pul ha-mitzri, this cowpea, Shizara, you know what, let's have a look at it.
I don't know which one.
Menachot, yeah. There was at one point over here.
Here. Oh, wait, here.
Okay.
Let's have a look at this. I should have done this before. My apologies. I was using the app on the phone, which has a translation but not a picture. After all that, I hope this actually has a picture.
Or at least an explanation of the watching the...
Yeah, there we go. It does. Okay.
Comes through again.
Yes. Those are the seeds, so you can have it for that.
Looks like pumpkin seeds.
And that's the actual stalks. That's the flower. So I suppose you can want it for that, or you can want it for that. And that would change.
But if you take it for that, then
it's earlier. Then as soon as it starts to grow roots, and it's already producing that. But otherwise you have to wait much longer until it produces this. I think that's it, right? Let's see. It appears that according to the Jerusalem Talmud, it appears that this plant, whose name is in Aramaic literally means Egyptian bean, is Vigna lutuela.
Could it be like a fava bean?
Of the what did you say?
Fava bean?
No, it says it's of the Fabodi family. That's what it is. It appears that the reference here is one of the.
Because they're grown in Egypt. I see.
Oh, yeah? It appears that the reference here is to one of the climbing variants of this plant. The stems climb or spread out a considerable distance. The pods are 3 to 13 centimeters long, and the seeds are small. The plant is edible fresh or dry. Today it's grown as animal fodder, but apparently in ancient times it was also grown for its seeds. There you have it.
Okay, so I guess it could have been used for animal fodder. If they wanted to see it.
Apparently. Okay. At any rate. So, this Pul HaMitzri, this Egyptian bean, Shazara Lazera, so he planted it for its seeds. So he's harvesting it much earlier. And therefore the determining factor as to what's grown before after the Rosh Hashanah for this vegetable is determined by not based on when it produces the actual vegetable, I guess the actual pods, but rather when it produces the roots, which is the beginning of its seeds. So says the Gemara, if part of it started to produce its roots before the cutoff date, before Rosh Hashanah, and part of it after Rosh Hashanah, you can't take the tithe from the half that produced its roots before Rosh Hashanah on the half that produced its roots after Rosh Hashanah, which makes it a very difficult task to give Meiser. On the day of Rosh Hashanah, you got to go and start cutting out all your thing and see what grows before and what grows after. It's very difficult. Correct? Following? You with me?
I'm not sure I understand.
Right, I'm not sure.
The roots. What does this have to do with the roots?
It starts
with the seeds?
Right. So at what point do I say it's already the seeds are in production?
When they're fully developed, no?
The way the Gemara says it is it goes by when it starts producing roots.
Roots?
Yeah, I guess when whatever you planted, I guess the seeds that you planted start producing roots.
That means produce the roots?
Well, to produce seeds, you're planting seeds, right? That's how it always goes. Even if you're producing,
They produce, yeah.
you're always using. Let's say if you're making wheat, you're taking wheat seeds and producing more wheat seeds. Right, so you're always using seeds.
It's a seed, and then it creates a shoot, and then the shoot develops, and
that happens to be a wheat. So when it comes to this, I guess this
Flowers.
seed produces roots and then flowers and then these pods, apparently, right? So if you're producing it for its seeds, the halacha is that if the reason why you're planting is because you want its seeds, then as soon as it starts producing roots, it's considered as if the seeds are in production, and therefore the cutoff time, beginning and end for the switch between last year's production and this year's production is not based on when it's fully developed, but when it produces its roots. That's the halacha. So now, if half the roots started producing before Rosh Hashanah, so it belongs to last year's tithe, and then whatever continues to produce after Rosh Hashanah belongs to the next year's tithe, making it very complicated to tithe, because you're going to cut your roots in half. It's very difficult to do that.
Right.
So it would therefore, but first the Gemara qualifies. So you don't take tithe from one half and the other half. If you in terms of one cannot take the tithes, not from the new fruit, not from the new production from this year. Alayashan on last year's production, the old one. You can't take last year's production and tithe alachadash on the new one. You can't take 20% of last year's produce and say 10% is freeing me up from this year's obligation and 10% is freeing me up of next year's obligation. Every year's got to be measured on its own. Now, when you're producing it for the sake of its seed, that happens once you start bearing root. So whatever roots start growing before Rosh Hashanah belongs to last year's production, and whatever roots start growing after Rosh Hashanah belongs to next year's production. Are we clear?
That's still complicated.
It's still very complicated, but are we clear on the halacha?
Yeah.
So, but the practicality of it's very complicated. So says the Gemara, Ketzad Yasa. What should he do? So Shimon Shazuri is speaking here. So what does he do? Cut his roots in half? So says the Gemara, says Shimon Shazuri, he collects all of the stuff and mixes them up together. So in some time from now, when he's ready to harvests everything and does a good mixing. So last year's production, a little bit different.
Okay.
Because the other case was, part of it, maybe Truma was given.
It was a doubt.
Yeah, we're certain. You're certain no tithe was taken. But but you're mixing up last year's production with this year's production because they're all roots. It's hard to cut the roots in half in the middle of the year, middle of your harvest, middle of your stuff growing. You'll kill your produce. You start cutting the roots. So you mix them all up, right? So now you have a big, I don't know, you have a big storage house full of seeds, yeah, and it's mixed up. Half of the seeds belong to last year's production, and half the seeds belong to this year's production. So, and then you take the tithe. So because it's very well mixed, so my tithe should be proportionally from last year and this year, just like the rest of the stuff, because it's very well mixed. If it's not well mixed, then it could be this half of the storehouse belongs to last year, and this half belongs to this year. And if I took the tithe from the left corner, the far right corner, let's say, then it could be the far right corner was from last year's produce, and I'm not taking the proper tithing from this year's produce. So therefore, if I mix them all up, right, then the ratio would be somewhat the same. All of last year's are equally measured and mixed with this year's, and if when I take the tithe, let's say it's 50-50, I can assume that 50% of my tithe is from last year and 50% from this year, and therefore it's all good. Are we clear? Yes, with me, Yosef?
I'm not sure.
Sorry?
I'm not sure.
So walk me through it. Tell me what you're missing.
I don't know how you're making a determination of proportion between the two different years.
Okay, so it's
How do you know what your proportion is?
you don't necessarily know. But you don't have to know. But you know that it is so. In other words,
No, it's mixed, yes.
but only if you actually physically mix them. If you don't physically mix them, right, then you don't know for sure, but it's possible that part of your room is exclusively from last year and part of your room is exclusively from this year. And therefore, which location in your room do you take your actual tithe from? So it could be I'm taking it 50-50 from this year to last year, but it could be I'm taking it from wholly this year's stuff, because it hasn't been mixed, right? And I don't know the physical location of this year's versus last year's produce, because it's all together. So it says of Shimon you have to physically mix all the produce.
So
and then when I physically mix it, I don't know what the proportion is, but whatever proportion it is equally mixed. And if when I take my produce, I take my tithe from whatever location in the room I'm taking it from, I can assume it's equally proportionally mixed like the rest of the room.
It's like a homogeneous.
Because I mixed it very well. You following?
Whatever the same proportion everywhere.
What tithing you're taking though?
Whatever required tithing, the truma, the meiser, all of them. The point is, Rabbi Shimon is giving me a tactic by which I can make sure that whatever I'm taking is proportional to the full mixture.
not only that, but proportionality is resolved with this idea of mixing, and also which actual seeds belong to which.
That's the point.
Right?
Exactly.
Right. So it's not 50-50 or 60-40. It's actually.
Doesn't make a difference whether
It doesn't matter.
No,
It could be.
it resolves that, and also resolves
uniform
which seeds belong to which.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
So it takes care of those two ideas.
It's exactly the point.
Yeah.
So even if it's a 90-10 ratio, if I mix it very well, and I take
50-50.
no,
90-10
if
all over.
I take 90-10, if it's 90-10, let's say 90 from last year and 10 from this year, and I mix the whole thing together, then the 90-10 is all over. So let's just make it like this.
Okay.
Let's just put it this way. If let's say I had exactly 100 beans.
Okay.
Make it easier. Let's say I had exactly 100 beans. I don't know this, but the truth is that 90 of them came from last year and 10 of them came from this year.
You know that.
I don't know this.
You don't know that.
I don't know, but it doesn't matter.
Right. Okay.
Let's say in theory that that's the number. And I mix them all very well, and I take 10 beans. I can safely assume, maybe I'm not right, but I can assume, because they're mixed very well, 9 of them came from last year, and 1 came from this year.
Well, where are you getting this 9 and 1 from?
I don't know that, but it's
Those are
possible.
examples.
Let's just say, and let's say I'm completely unaware of this,
What are you
but
giving?
let's say it is 50-50. I'm doing the same exact thing. I'm mixing it together, taking 10 pieces, 5 from last year, 5 from this year. I don't know that, but because I mixed them very well, I can safely assume it's that way. So therefore, I don't need to know now what the actual proportionalities are because I mixed them all together. And therefore, my taking of it is proportional to the mixture, regardless of whether or not I know the actual number. That's the point. If I knew the number, then I would just do it. If I knew the number that these 90 came from last year and these 10 came from this year, I'll take 1 from here and 9 from here. I wouldn't have the problem. But because I don't know the ratio, I don't know the proportionality, and I don't know which physical beans came from which one, I mix them all together, and automatically, by way of assumption, whatever I'm taking is proportional to the entire batch.
Right, so
It's a little bit of a leniency, but this is the best we can do.
You're
You're
giving 5 and-
taking a sample, and we assume that sample
Is a representative
is the
of,
rest
that's
of
right.
the whole thing.
Because it's mixed together, I am
together.
assuming that the sample I'm taking is representative of the entire population.
Yeah, that's
Because I've mixed them all. If I didn't mix them, then I don't know. It's possible that last year's are on that corner, and I'm only taking from this corner, and I'm missing. Sorry?
Yeah.
Are we clear?
Yeah.
I'll give you an
Good.
example. Let's say you had like 1,000 pennies, and you know there's a certain percentage of this year's and last year's,
Let's say,
and so.
you
And you
put
want
it-
to find the percentage, you can't count the pennies, but let's say you mix them perfectly well. You take one sample, that's 70% of the whole thing. It's probably like 6 of. I can see if they're perfectly mixed.
I mean, you take 10 of them, it'll be equally proportionate to whatever the full total proportion is.
Yeah.
You might be off by some percentage, but Rabbi Shimon Shazuri is being lenient here to allow us to not ruin our Pul HaMitzri when it's halfway rooting.
Right.
Following?
Yeah, so you don't have to count each
Okay.
individual
You don't
bean.
have to-
Good
Otherwise, I'd have to cut the production right at Rosh Hashanah and take out half the stuff, and then start the whole process again of planting. I would ruin my produce. It would be a massive loss to my business or to my whatever it is I'm
The
doing.
Gosman upon a bean counter.
A bean counter.
Bean counter.
What were we going to say?
No, nothing, no, it's this lesson.
Okay, so we're clear on this.
Yeah, that's the way he's giving it leniency.
All
to
right.
make it easier.
So the first line of the wider set of lines, he mixes all of them together. The nimtza toirim umaisim and achada shabai al achada shabai, yashin shabai al yashin shabai. And the result is he ends up taking tithe from the new stuff in proportionate to the amount of new stuff there is, and he takes tithe of the old stuff in proportionate to the old stuff that there is, because he's equally mixed it all together, and therefore whatever he's taking is representative of the whole mixture. And because this is Rabbi Shimon Shazuri speaking, he gives us this leniency, allowing us not to be exact in our tithing, at least in this extraneous circumstance. Perhaps this is what Rabbi Hanina meant when he said that Allah follows Shimon Shazuri, because Rabbi Shimon Shazuri is speaking here. So said the Gemara, this can't be the case, because Ha'it Marla, we've already been told about this. Amr Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman, Rabbi Shmuel son of Nachman, he said, Amr Rabbi Yechanan, Rabbi Yechanan, halacha Rabbi Shimon Shazuri, that halacha follows Rabbi Shimon Shazuri. So we already have, by tradition, from Rabbi Yechanan through Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, that the halacha follows Shimon Shazuri. V'im Isa, and if Rabbi Hanina was speaking of this case when he said the halacha follows Shimon Shazuri, hunami lema, he would also be listed as part of this tradition. As we explained before, that these traditions were committed to memory and passed on from generation to generation. So if we have one tradition that tells us that halacha follows Shimon Shazuri, then there'd be no need for somebody else to come up with a new tradition to tell us the same exact thing. Or, if it was, then it would be part of the same tradition. Rabbi Yechanan and Rabbi Hanina both say that halacha follows Shimon Shazuri. But it's not the case. And therefore, when Rabbi Hanina says that halacha follows Shimon Shazuri, it must be some other case. Okay, we have time for one more? Let's do one more case. The Gemara is about to tell us 2 in a row, but we'll see how much time we have. Elamar Papa, rather, Papa says like this. Aseda. When Rabbi Hanina said that halacha follows Shimon Shazuri, it's talking about the case of, quote, a box. What is this? We'll find out in a moment. Whereas Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said that when Rav Hanina said that halacha follows Shimon Shazuri, ayayin is talking about a special law regarding wine. So box and wine. Let's discover what they are.
Box wine.
Box wine. Yeah, I don't think so.
I think they had it back then.
No. So let's first look at box. Papa Amar Absei, Papa says it's talking about the halacha of regarding a box. What's the halacha regarding a box? So a little background is that the halacha, there's very strict rules as to what is and isn't susceptible to impurity. Right? We talked about this before, that halachic purity and impurity is not to be imagined like dirt, the way people assume it, or even like disease. It's kind of like a pathogen, like a biological pathogen. So biological pathogens need conductors, proper tissue or whatever it is that they host. Yes, they need a proper host to conduct the pathogen. Now the host of the pathogen, I'm telling you this because the next halach is also going to be required to know what I'm telling you now. The next two, both are important for the wine and for the box. In order for the so 2 things. First of all, the pathogen needs a proper host to transmit the pathogen, number 1. Number 2, the host actually can change the status of the pathogen too. If the host happens to be the type that might exasperate the original pathogen, make it worse than where it came from, depending on what the host is.
Power of the host.
Yeah, so the same thing's true of tumah and impurity entirely. We say ritual impurity, right? Not that makes the person any less. It's ritual impurity. It's to say that he's now not allowed to go to the temple and do certain rituals. So we're saying ritual impurity. So whatever this ritual impurity is touching and being transmitted to has to be a proper host of impurity. Number one. Number two, depending on the circumstance of the host, it can actually change the status of the impurity and actually increase it, make it a worse impurity than where it got it from, as we shall see in the case of wine.
That's of course rabbinic.
Rabbinic, yes. Rabbinic. Biblically speaking, it worked that way. That's correct. Yes, I should qualify that. That what I'm talking about now is after the rabbinic enactments and all that. But this is the general rule. Pathogen is a good way to imagine it, because you see something transmitting and changing based on who the host is. Okay. So in order for an item to be a host of certain impurities, it has to be a keli. It has to be a vessel. So a home is not a host to most impurities. Some, let's say, sardas, it does have, but most impurities a home is not a transmitter. But certain things, most certain impurities require that the item, the host that it's living in, is a keli, a vessel. So we need to define different things. When is it a vessel and when is it no longer a vessel? Is a wagon a vessel? It's a big box. Is it a vessel? It's not a vessel. A boat. It's also a big box, just oddly shaped. So is it a vessel or not a vessel? And when do these things go from the status of vessel to not being a vessel? That's the Gemara is analyzing right now. So now we've learned like this. Beis Shammai says that so the halacha is, once a box hits a certain size, it's no longer a box and a vessel, and now it's a tub or something. It's a wagon. It no longer is in the status of a box, a vessel box. Following?
You mean for transportation purposes?
Talking about for being a carrier of impurity.
Okay.
It's too large.
Oh, it's too large to be considered a vessel. Yes, it's too large to be considered a vessel. It's something else. It's a miniature room. I don't know what it is, but it's not a vessel anymore.
It's become too large.
You can't call it a pot.
Yeah.
It's too big.
It's called metaltal mali v'rekan.
It's become another sort of being.
It's another being. It left. It's correct.
That's what
It left the status of being a vessel, becomes something else. So the size is the size of memsa, whatever. It doesn't matter. The point is, it's a certain size. And the question is, how do you measure this box to determine its size? And this is the dispute. In time we've learned. Haseda box, Beis Shammai says, nimdedes, it's measured bifnim, from the inside. So the hollow inside, you don't measure the walls as part of the size. So let's say the size is memsa, 40 sa, whatever that is. So the inside of the box is 40 sa. Let's say the inside of the box is 39.9 sa.
It's like the volume.
The volume of the actual space inside, yes. But the wall itself, if you measured the wall of the box too, it would be 40 sa. So is this thing a vessel or not a vessel? So Beis Shammai says you measure it from the hollow inside, from the volume that the box would hold. And because it doesn't hold 40 sa, it's still considered a box. Beis Hillel says, mibachutz, you measure it from the outside. That means you measure the space of the wall itself as part of the actual vessel. So even if the box only holds 39.9 sa, but if you measured the space of the box too, of the actual walls of the box, it would match 40 sa. So it is considered too big and no longer a vessel and no longer a conductor of impurity. No longer a host to impurity. Clear? Mm-hmm. So this is Machleket Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel.
What's it called in the second group? Inside dimension, outside dimension.
Inside dimension, outside dimension.
That's the term for it. That's always a dispute. You have to measure something. Do you mean inside or outside?
It's like, playing tennis, the line. Well,
Exactly.
You know the rule is the rule. But
Right. Inside the line or outside the line.
Know the rule.
On the line or inside the line.
Right.
That's right. So the Gemara continues now. Umaydim, but they both agree. Elu v'elu, they both agree. Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel both agree. She'ein over aglayim, that the space that the legs take up. So the legs would be a little bit bigger than the rest of the walls. So even Beis Hillel would agree that that's not part of the measurement. The walls, yes, but not the legs that pop out. Likewise, va'oivei ha lav vavzin. I should pronounce that word. Vazvizin, which is the rim at the top of the box, which is also a little bit bigger than the rest of the walls. that too is not counted.
Like a barrel. Right?
Like a barrel has
Something like
some rim at the top,
Yeah.
which is a little bit bigger. Yeah. So Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel both agree the legs and the rim are not counted. Even Beis Hillel would say that the walls of the box are counted to measure its size, but not the legs and not the rim. Rabbi Yossi says, Moedim, they actually both agree. They actually both agree that you do count the space of the rim and the legs. Now, why would Beis Shammai count the space of the rims and the legs? If the rim of the legs were such that they were hollow and held more water, Beis Shammai would say that space is counted as part of the measurement. And Beis Hillel would actually say that the thickness of the actual leg and the actual rim is counted. So it's machlokes within a machlokes. Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are disputing whether or not the measure of the actual box is part of the measurement. And now there's another dispute whether or not when they were arguing about the space in the box, does their argument also include the legs and the rim? Is that part of the argument? Or is it left out of the argument? Clear?
Why? Is it because they're whether or not they're hollow and they can hold?
Let's just say it's hollow, for argument's sake.
Okay.
But the rim certainly has space to put stuff inside, right? Because
Right.
it makes it taller, let's say. Okay. But the space in between the legs, so if the legs are propping the box up, so there's a half an inch there. Do you count that half an inch? That Rabbi says no. Beis Hillel would leave that out.
Space?
Yeah, the air space would make the vessel considered bigger and therefore no longer a box, no longer a vessel. So here Rabbi Yossi says, okay, Beis Hillel would agree that this airspace under the box that's being propped up by the legs, definitely not part of the measurement. But Rabbi Shimon Shazari says he's the most lenient. If the legs propped up the box, that the airspace under the box is now bigger than the size of a handbreadth, okay, then ein beineihem nindad. Then you don't measure that space because it's too big. It's already its own unique halachic space, and therefore not part of the measurements of the box. Then lav, but if it's less than a handbreadth, nimded, it is to be considered part of the measurement. And it's part of the dispute between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel says, so let's just take Rabbi Shimon Shazari's version because this is what we're going with. Rabbi Shimon Shazari's final version is that when Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai argued as to whether or not the physical space of the walls is part of the measurement, they were also arguing about the airspace under it. If the box is propped up by legs, and you have a half an inch airspace there, which can make your measurement significantly bigger, right? Because it's quite wide. Let's say
It could go over the 40 saw.
it could take it from 39.6 saw into 40.1, and therefore, as Shimon Shazari says, even there's a dispute between Beis Hillel and Shammai whether or not it's considered a vessel. So he's expanding the version of what a vessel means as a conductor for impurity, making it it's actually a chumrah, making it harder for it to lose its status.
No, actually easier.
It's easier to lose its status as a vessel because it's a smaller box, even though it only carries 39.6 volume. But because the walls plus the airspace under it makes 40, it's therefore, in Rav Shimon Shazari's view, based on his understanding of the Hillel, it is considered a box, no longer a vessel, and thus no longer a conductor of impurity. And of this, says our Papa, this is what Rav Chanina meant when he said, Halacha follow Shimon Shazari. And this is undisputed. We don't have any other tradition talking about this case for Rav Shimon Shazari, and thus we can actually apply Rav Chanina's law, Rav Chanina's statement, which said that Halacha follow Shimon Shazari can apply to this case of the box. And God willing, tomorrow we'll get to the case of the wine. Another case where Rav Shimon Shazari speaks with respect to impurity, which I kind of alluded to today already, where nobody else says that Halacha follow Shimon Shazari, and thus we can apply, according to Rav Nachman, we can apply Rav Shimon Shazari's words to the case of the wine, and that, God willing, tomorrow.
So those two cases are the ones that we found.
So these two cases we actually found that Rav Shimon Shazari can apply to.
So the vessel was less than 40 say, and the box is more than 40 say?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, once it hits 40 saw, it's no longer a vessel, it's a box.
Okay.
But how do you measure the 40 saw? Do you include there and all the rest of that stuff we just discussed? All right, have a wonderful day, everybody.